Only one game remains in the college football season. Mark Rogers TV and Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC looking forward to Alabama-Clemson, but we're also looking forward to 2016 and reviewing this past season in the ACC, the top 10 offensive players in the conference, Mike. It was a great season. It seems pretty obvious at the top. We had one guy make it to the Heisman Trophy presentation as well, but a lot of breakout players, guys that really dominated the conference.
Yeah, there were a lot of big-time playmakers this year. Some expected, some that we didn't necessarily expect to make as big an impact as they actually did as the season went on. But I have my top 10 list here. We're going to start at number 10, Kanan Severin, second-team All-ACC wide receiver from the Virginia Cavaliers. Yes, it was another down season for Virginia in football, but Kanan Severin was a big-time playmaker on offense for the Cavaliers. He had 54 catches for 759 yards and 8 touchdowns on the season. He really emerged as a go-to target there on the offense for Virginia. Some of the big-time games he had, most notably against Notre Dame in the second game of the season, one that Virginia almost stole away from the Irish. 11 catches for 153 yards in that game. And he had a 3-touchdown effort late in the season in a loss to Louisville. He had 8 catches for 116 yards, was averaging almost 15 yards per catch in that game with his 3 touchdowns. So he's my number 10 ranked player in the conference. Number 9, wide receiver Tyler Boyd, who out of Pittsburgh is now bound to the NFL. Boyd is a big-time player. It was no secret coming into the season the contribution that he would make if healthy to the Panthers this season. 91 catches for 926 yards and 6 touchdowns on the year, and he was a guy that also contributed from time to time in the return game where he was always dangerous as well. Number 8, we're heading to Clemson, who has one big game remaining, and they'll be relying a lot in the passing game on wide receiver Artavis Scott. Scott had 89 catches for 868 yards and 5 touchdown catches on the year. Number 7, NC State tight end Jalen Samuels, first team All-ACC. On the year, Samuels had over 30 catches more than the next closest guy on his team. He had 65 catches for almost 600 yards and 7 touchdowns. Was a go-to target in the passing game for Jacoby Brissett en route to NC State's season that led to a bowl game, which wasn't necessarily expected there, the way the first couple of games went, non-conference play. Although they got off to a hot start, we weren't sure really what we had there for the Wolfpack, but they ended up squeaking out 6 wins and getting themselves into a bowl game. Number 6, North Carolina quarterback Marquise Williams. Man, we've talked about him a lot. He completed over 61% of his passes this year for over 3,000 yards, had 24 touchdowns to only 10 interceptions on the season. On rushing the football, he was the second leading rusher on the team, nearly 1,000 yards rushing, ended the season at 948 yards total in the run game with 13 touchdowns. So he did a little bit of everything for North Carolina en route to their bowl game there in the Russell Athletic Bowl, which didn't really end as we necessarily expected. Number 5, Clemson's Wayne Gallman. Now, we talk a lot about Deshaun Watson and Artavis Scott, the passing game for Clemson, but Wayne Gallman is the guy at running back that sets it all up. Had almost 1,500 yards rushing this season and 12 touchdowns, averaged 5.5 yards per carry for a very efficient Clemson offense. And, of course, there's one guy that we'll get to here in a second that is going to be near the top of everybody's list. But number 4, Virginia Tech wide receiver Isaiah Ford. Isaiah Ford became the first 1,000-yard receiver in Virginia Tech football history. As crazy as that sounds, he finished the season with 1,100 yards receiving and 11 touchdowns. He was individually a force in many games this season. Just a big-time target for Michael Brewer, Brendan Motley, whoever was in a quarterback for the Hokies at whatever given time. A couple of big games for Ford this year. 6 catches, 128 yards against Purdue and a 51-24 win back in early September. You go on down the list, he had a 3-touchdown game against NC State. They're only 39 yards receiving, but when 3 out of your 4 catches are touchdowns in a game, you're doing pretty well. And then, of course, the final 3 games he absolutely tore up en route to an All-ACC selection. Ford had 8 catches for 155 yards and a touchdown in a losing effort to North Carolina. He had 6 catches for 121 yards and a touchdown In the season finale against Virginia, a victory that ended up sending Virginia Tech to the Independence Bowl, where Ford concluded his sophomore campaign with 12 catches for 227 yards and a touchdown, which included a 75-yard scamper on a catch and run there. Really turned it up the field in the first half. Number 3 on the list, another North Carolina player, running back Elijah Hood. Hood with 1,463 yards rushing, 17 touchdowns on the season. That spread option look there with Marquise Williams made the Tar Heels especially dangerous there in the run game. And Elijah Hood was a big reason why Marquise Williams was able to have so much success in the passing game as well as rushing the football on the quarterback keeper. Even though Florida State had a down year, they still have number 2 on my list with running back Dalvin Cook, who really should have been a dark horse for the Heisman Trophy and was never really given serious consideration. Cook had almost 1,700 yards rushing this season and 19 touchdowns. When Cook didn't play well, Florida State's offense didn't play well. They were heavily reliant upon him. And when he was healthy, he looked really good, and which was a surprise because most of the season he was struggling with a hamstring injury and was still extremely effective in the run game and emerged as one of the top running backs in all of college football. And number 1, not a surprise to anybody, but the guy that came oh so close to winning the Heisman Trophy, quarterback Deshaun Watson, an All-ACC first-team selection. He was a Maxwell Award winner. He's the guy that makes the Clemson offense go. 3,700 yards passing before playing in the national championship game, which kind of remains to be seen what his final numbers will be. But going into that game, 3,700 yards passing, 68% completion percentage, and 31 touchdowns, only 12 interceptions. What's even more impressive is what he's done in the rushing game. We already spoke about Wayne Gallman and his nearly 1,500 yards rushing. But Deshaun Watson had over 1,000 yards rushing in his own right this year, and he also averaged 5.5 yards per carry with the same amount of touchdowns, 12, that Wayne Gallman had. So it was a great season top to bottom across the ACC. I mean, I'm sure there are going to be some snubs from my list, but Mark, let's hear yours.
All right, Mike, a few discrepancies here. Let's start with number 10 in Marquise Williams, senior quarterback at North Carolina. You read off the numbers. What's been impressive with Marquise Williams for the past 2 years is second on the team, as you mentioned, in rushing this past season. He led the Tar Heels in rushing in 2014. He kind of cleaned up some of the turnovers, which made the North Carolina offense not just explosive, but also a little bit more efficient this past season, almost 1,000 yards rushing. What knocks him back on my list are disappointing efforts against South Carolina in the opener when his 2 red zone interceptions, 3 total picks cost them probably a win against South Carolina, and the final game in the ACC championship game against Clemson. Not really a good effort from Williams. Hit on some big plays, but only 11 of 33 in the passing game. And in the Baylor game, he bounced back with a pretty nice effort, 3 touchdowns in putting up 38 points against Baylor. At number 9, Artavis Scott, a wide receiver from Clemson, 89 catches, less than 10 yards reception, though. I find that kind of interesting in Artavis Scott. The big pub on him coming into the season was that he breaks tackles, run after the catch, but still averaged in a very explosive offense, less than 10 yards per reception. No Mike Williams on the other side to draw the double team, so Artavis Scott became the number 1 receiver for Clemson once Williams was lost in the first game and still put up very productive numbers, but only 5 touchdown receptions. At number 8, I give some love to the offensive line with Joe Thuney out of North Carolina State, a guard, first team All-ACC, a senior, 27 career starts, leader on this team. Everybody says it on the North Carolina State Wolfpack that this guy is one of the main leaders and representatives of this team. When you see the Wolfpack interviewed, he's usually one of the main players that's interviewed for this team, very much a spokesman for the Wolfpack. At number 7, Tyler Boyd of Pitt. Is anybody targeted during the course of his collegiate career, not just this past season, but over the entirety of the career, more than Tyler Boyd? He is the Pitt passing attack, 91 catches, 900 yards, plus 6 touchdowns. Tyler Boyd with a bright future in going to the NFL. Isaiah Ford, you talked about him well, Mike. 75 receptions and 11 touchdowns. What's really impressive to me, and you pointed this out as well, is missing Michael Brewer for about 3 games and Brendan Motley not targeting and being able to get the ball downfield to the wide receiver position, Ford was still able to have a prolific season there in Blacksburg and a historic season for the Hokies in terms of the numbers he put up. At number 5, we go to Wayne Gallman. I think his worth was really shown against Oklahoma in the semifinal Orange Bowl game. 26 rushes for $150. Deshaun Watson basically carried the offense in the first half. The Tigers went to Gallman in the second half, and he was explosive. He made Oklahoma defenders miss all over the place. He, by brute force, ran for a ton of yardage, and that was coming off an ACC championship game in which he mounted 187 yards against North Carolina at almost 1,500 yards, and will have a shot, obviously, against Bama to do some more damage as just a sophomore. At number 4, I like Elijah Hood. Mike, we've talked about it a number of times, probably one of the more underappreciated backs in college football. Finally started to get his due as people started to notice and recognize in November that North Carolina was possibly going to make a run to the ACC championship and possibly beyond that. 17 rushing touchdowns. He caught 13 passes out of the backfield, ran for over 1,400 yards, had a big 220-yard day against NC State. Disappointing considering everything that he did for the North Carolina offense, that they only found 13 rushing attempts for him against Baylor, and he still ran for 116 yards. All right, at number 3, one of the main reasons why Elijah Hood does all that damage, Mike, of course, Landon Turner, 42 consecutive starts. First team All-American on most lists. What's incredible about this kid is he had a major setback as a junior in high school. He broke his ankle, tore a ton of ligaments, actually had to, they refer to it in many descriptions of his comeback that he actually had to teach himself how to walk, and got back on the football field, became a major recruit, and Landon Turner's got a bright future, as does Joe Thuney in the National Football League. At number 2, we're definitely on the same page with Dalvin Cook. What a year he had. This is one of the few times where Florida State really didn't have the explosion down the field in the passing game, so he was really focused on by defenses, and they still couldn't stop him in a number of games against the likes of South Florida and Wake Forest. Dalvin Cook actually had to put the offense on his back against some lesser foes and pull out some victories. Interesting to see that he couldn't do it all by himself in the bowl game against Houston. 18 rushes for 33 yards. It's kind of hard to imagine that anybody could contain Dalvin Cook like that. And at number 1, obvious, Deshaun Watson. It's difficult to place him anywhere else with everything that he has done for the Clemson Tigers in leading them to 14 consecutive wins, coming off a fabulous freshman season in which he threw 14 TDs against just 2 picks as a freshman. I still try to realize the significance of doing that as just a freshman. Rushed actually for 100 yards in 5 of the last 6 games, as he was really needed in the rushing game as well. $145 on the ground against OU, and the kid extends plays. He seems to have an uncanny ability to not only extend the plays with his legs, but know when to pull back and throw it down the field versus taking off and breaking containment and taking off on his own. So there you go. And of course, he's going to be much needed against the Alabama Crimson Tide come Monday night, and going to have to play probably the game of his life. Mike, very interesting top 10 list. We'll have to get back together and knock out the top 10 on defense.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds good. So be on the lookout for that.